All right, so welcome everybody and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jackie Williams. I am the president of DCD Australia. I've worked on the committee now for a number of years and recently took over as president. We're really excited to have everybody here tonight, and we've got some marvellous speakers with us. So I am going to do a very quick introduction to them and then let them introduce themselves a little bit. So we have two members of our committee with us tonight. So we've got Alyshia Boettcher and Professor Elspeth Froude, who are both members of our committee. So Alyshia is a teacher and she'll share a little bit of her story with you. And Elspeth is an occupational therapist, so lots of clinical experience as well as doing research in the field of DCD as well. And then we have the wonderful Pia Hazelwood, who, if you are in Perth, you probably know Perth Kids Hub. If you aren't in Perth, probably should get familiar with Perth Kids Hub because it has some wonderful resources, even if you are not in Perth. And Pia is a parent of a child with DCD, as well as running and founding Perth Kids Hub. So she has lots of interesting experiences that she can share with us as well. So I will let them introduce themselves properly. So Pia, I think you're going to start that off.
Hopefully my screen is sharing. Thumbs up, Jackie.
Yep, it's perfect.
Yep. Great. Okay, the tech's working. So I am Pia. I'm a mum in Perth. I've got two beautiful children, one boy who's 10 and a little girl who has DCD, who's 6 years old. So I became involved in this when DCD Australia were looking for some great examples of collaborating with your school successfully around transitioning into school and supports that were available. And I was able to list off some really great things that we've been able to introduce to support our daughter, and then somehow got roped into presenting it. So I'm going to share with you our experiences of primary school. Luckily, Alyshia will be touching on high school for those of you with older kids later on. We haven't quite got there, but I'm certainly familiar with transitioning through and starting school and some of the early primary years and some of the challenges that can present and some of the things to think about. So I will start with our journey. So from early on, we probably noticed some movement concerns with Grace from crawling, and it became much more obvious once she started doing more peer activities such as baby ballet classes at about 3 years, being able to see what the other little girls were capable of in terms of their movements and being able to imitate the instructor really kind of made me wonder whether she was just as clumsy as I am, or whether there was something going on. And because she'd been braced as a baby for hip dysplasia, I initially thought it was related to the fact that she'd worn a brace for 12 months. So we went in for a consult with paediatric physio, had an assessment, were reassured that the bracing had nothing to do with it, and we were encouraged to attend weekly early movers classes led by a physio, where it became much more obvious that even with that explicit, guided, regular instruction around motor skills, she was still finding it really hard to control her body and coordinate that. So we continued with therapy, added it in occupational therapy to help with some of the self-care and starting to get ready for kindy. And then we started into the school system. So Grace over here was starting kindergarten when she was just before she turned 4. She was one of the youngest in her classes, being an end of in her class because she's born towards the end of April. So we were already a little bit nervous, the fact that she was going to be one of the youngest in her class. But we were able to manage mostly through kindergarten with the 5-day fortnight. We certainly found the weeks where she was doing 3 consecutive days were really fatiguing, and we started to get a bit of school refusal towards the end of that year, where Grace was making comments about how her peers were able to write their name and she couldn't. And she really started resisting going to school at that point. And so we had some concerns, expressed them. We're working with our OT, and luckily we had the best team with us. So they recommended that when we commenced pre-primary, which is our first full year of formal education, we do a graded transition. So we stepped Grace up to full-time schooling over the course of the whole term. We started with half days and then gradually added in full days because we wanted that routine of going to school every day, but recognising that she wasn't going to be able to cope with the fatigue and pain from completing a full day. One of the things we did learn from that was that I was picking her up at the beginning of lunch, and that actually impacted her ability to form those kind of social friendships because she wasn't there for playtime at lunch, and she was probably pretty exhausted. It's pretty hot in Perth here in February when you're sort of starting at school as well. But it really did kind of reduce the amount of playtime that she had only to recess to start to build those friendships. So that certainly was, I guess, a lesson for us around making sure that you're also prioritising the social opportunities at school so they can build those early friendships. Our first diagnosis was the hypermobility spectrum disorder, and we of course had to wait until she was 5 years to have the DCD diagnosis that our physio and OT had suggested she likely had by our paediatrician and paediatric rheumatologist. We went from there and we applied for NDIS early approach, which has been life-changing for us in being able to access therapy supports regularly, and we do weekly physio, weekly OT, and we have other things kind of going on there. Unfortunately, we're expecting that funding will go away in the next few months. We've been warned that because we're on the developmental delay pathway that we will have an eligibility assessment, and it's unlikely that funding will continue, but we will continue to advocate in that area. What we also did with Grace was we decided to move her to a different school. So she's moved to a different public school where we've had the best experience. They have been super helpful and collaborative and accommodating. Not only have they allowed Grace to repeat pre-primary, so she's now the oldest in her class by 2.5 months, so really no difference. But what we wanted was that time and space for her to be able to continue her regular therapies and for us not to be concerned around her missing school due to time that she might have needed if she was really fatigued or in pain, or to complete those therapies, because there's no way she can do a full day of school and then go to physio or OT. She's just, she's spent. And we were concerned that if she'd stepped up to year one this year with those academic expectations increasing, that cognitively that load would have just been too much, and she would have been feeling like physically and mentally she was really struggling compared to her peers. So it's actually been really nice to see this year that she's had a bit of space to grow socially and developmentally, and it's been such a good move for us to repeat that year. But also we've moved into a smaller school that is less overwhelming for her, and we were able to do that out of catchment. So we were 2 streets out of catchment, and I have to say we were so lucky that the school allowed us in and understood our situation and have been able to work with us. So I'm going to share some of the things that we've been doing with school that might be things that other people can think about. I guess the first tip that I would have is that the school year is a marathon and not a sprint, and you need to think about in advance the energy levels that kids will have and what kind of occurs over the school year. And I see each of those batteries as quite a good representation of what happens in term 1, where you start off after the school holidays and you've got lots of energy. Term 2, it's gone down a little bit. Term 3 seems to have everything in there, from athletics, carnivals to book week. And term 4 is getting really hot and everyone's excited and fractious, and the teachers are over it and the kids are over it. So there's, I think, regular things that kind of happen during the school year that are worth planning or thinking about in advance around participation in athletics carnivals, swimming carnivals, in-school swimming lessons, and how you might be able to collaborate with your school around those kind of events, or annual occurrences to make sure that your child can participate in some way and is well supported in doing that. And also thinking around, we did the graded transition to school for Grace over term 1. But this year we also took a 3-year middle of the year break, because by the end of term 2, that last week she just needed off. Like, there was no point her attending school. By having that big break, then she was able to come back in refreshed over term 3. So I think working in with the school around letting them know that we need to modify the year calendar a little bit, and it might be something that we also look at in December this year if we see that she's getting far too tired and there's no benefit of her going in and she's not learning anything because she's in so much pain. We may taper down towards the end of the year, but the school have been really receptive as to when we've raised kind of concerns and working with us around that. One of the other things that has worked super well for us is a modified attendance plan. So Grace currently attends 3.5 days at school. She does full days Monday to Wednesday. Thursday she does till lunchtime so that she can have a rest at home for about an hour before she goes to a physio session. And then on Friday she has an outdoors program which works on fine motor, gross motor, social skills, as well as some group OT. And so that's how we've been able to manage her fatigue proactively. And by doing that with the school in advance, we actually know which subjects we've agreed that she can miss, and also around managing her fatigue levels that really kind of increase over the course of the week. We try and prioritise making sure that she's there for lunch, for social occasions, but also for the kind of core units and the literacy and all those things which typically are held in the morning. Some of the other tools that we found really useful were using some of the Every Human adaptive shoes so that Grace could independently put on off her shoes. We got a roller backpack off on Amazon in the sales, which we prettied up with some mermaid things. We've also got some adaptive seating for Grace, so when she's sitting on the mat, she uses a particular chair. In the school, we're able to apply for a lone chair, a Riften chair that's got armrests for her, which provides helps with the fatigue and sensory input. She uses a slope board and ear defenders because she has sensory avoidant profile. We've made sure that our lunch boxes are easily accessible. We also got a great sticker from a Perth dietitian here, which has got a really nice message around that the lunchbox being packed by somebody who loves them, and it's up to the child to eat what they want in the order that they want. So there's no pressure for Grace, who is a very slow eater, to feel like she has to eat everything in there before she can go and play. And we found that really effective. Oops, sorry, I need to go backwards. No, I can't go back, sorry. All right, that's just telling me to go along, I think. So what can we do with that? No. Oops, sorry, broke it now. Okay, no, there we go, hang on. Sorry, bear with me. Ready? Okay, last one was we got some monkey bars at home, and she has monkey bars at school and all the kids can use them and she can't. But we were able to get some at home, which we purchased privately, which we really put down very low so that she's been able to practice acquiring those skills at home. And I think we've got to 3 monkey bars now. So we're starting to see some progress and some confidence in that, but it's really supported that play in the playground. One thing that I found so helpful is making sure that we meet with the teachers well in advance, or sort of upfront, and to explain not only about what DCD is, because most people never heard of it or really understand how it can impact in the classroom and all the ways that it actually can. So we use for both of our kids a 1-page handover document, and we'll share this as a template so that people can take it and modify it for their own. I guess my main tips would be, the first one being, if you don't ask, you don't get. we were told we'd never be able to repeat Grace and we'd never be able to move to another government school outside of catchment. But we asked, and then we asked again, and finally we got there with the support also of our paediatrician. So not only have we been very lucky, but we've been persistent in advocating for her. I think getting your therapist to your school is so important. Having collaborative case conferences between our OTs and also having OTs come out and do in-classroom observations and observations where they can share that just-in-time coaching with the teachers, but also be able to bring back feedback on what they need to work on with Grace in therapy. And having that case conference around, being on the same page around fatigue management. That was where the modified attendance plan came out as we really worked through those concerns. I think recess and lunch need as much, if not more, support, and we've found our OTs have been fabulous for this, around recognising how fatigue or being reluctant to play with peers can really sort of affect the social skills. Educating up, down, sideways, so you're educating everyone in that school, including the students, and there are some great books out there that you can share with teachers that they can read to the other students. And I would say that we always try and assume positive intent with the schools, and we've always had really lovely teachers. But if you find that after you've been advocating for your child, if you're not getting anywhere, and typically if it's like the leadership of the school are not understanding the supports that you need, then I would say don't be afraid to walk. Moving Grace to a smaller school has been the absolute best outcome for us, and finding a school that's been really collaborative and supportive really shows me what is possible. That's it from me.
Thanks so much for sharing your journey, Pia. Sorry, Elspeth, I was going to throw across to you, and I would just in between just say that we do have Q&A, so there is an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to pop them in the chat. Elspeth and Alyshia are both going to talk a little bit about their experiences and things, and then we will circle back to questions and things. So we will get there. As I said, feel free to pop them in the chat in the meantime. And over to you, Elspeth.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Pia. That was fabulous, and certainly agree with all of those suggestions, and particularly the ones around getting your therapist to school and things. That's just really important. So I'm Elspeth Froude. I'm the Professor of Occupational Therapy at Australian Catholic University, and I've had an interest in DCD really since I graduated as a therapist, which is too long ago to say. And my PhD was in children's handwriting with DCD, so that's been an interest. And I'm also a co-op instructor, which is the gold standard intervention for children with developmental coordination disorder. So I'll share a few things from those elements of my background. So for those of you that don't know, an occupational therapist is somebody who's interested in occupation, which is essentially anything that we do in life. And we support and enable children to participate in the environments that they need to, so whether that's home, school or community. And we're interested in supporting children in the things that they want to do, they need to do and are expected to do. So those three different elements might be a focus of occupational therapy. Now we've got a few questions here around diagnosis. So I'll just start with that element first, and then I'll move on to intervention, and then talk specifically a little bit about handwriting, because we know that that's an area that can be a real struggle for children with DCD. So diagnosis usually occurs from 5, but there is a tool called the Little DCD screening tool, which is for 3 and 4-year-olds, which is available on their website. If you Google that, Little DCD, you do have to pay for that one, but a therapist will have it if you're working with the therapist, if you do want to do that screening. And then from 5, you can get the formal diagnosis, usually from a paediatrician or a multidisciplinary team. Occupational therapists very much contribute to that diagnosis through the motor assessments, and there's a DCD questionnaire, which is for 5 to 15-year-olds, which can be used as a screening tool as well. It's usually a great place to start with the screening tool, and if they score within that range where it's suspected that they could have DCD, then you can move on to having the motor assessments done and then going to see a paediatrician to get the diagnosis confirmed. So occupational therapists can't make a diagnosis, but they can contribute to it and can identify that there are features of DCD. We had some questions too around is how necessary is a diagnosis? What's the relevance, I guess, of a diagnosis? And I think it's always a struggle when we think about that, because we don't particularly want to label people. We don't want to particularly label children as having any particular disorder. But most parents actually tell us that it's actually helpful to have a diagnosis. And that's because you're understanding your child. It gives you something to really understand why they're having these challenges. It also steers you in the right direction towards the resources that can help you on your journey with your child with DCD. So I think most parents would say that that has been helpful. But unfortunately in Australia, it can be quite difficult to get a diagnosis of DCD. Some paediatricians feel that that the impact of it is not as significant as perhaps some other disorders, and so it hasn't been prioritised within the paediatrician world to make diagnoses. But we're hoping to change that, and DCD Australia are being advocates for that to make that more accessible for people to get that diagnosis. I think that's probably all I need to say about diagnosis, and you might have some more questions about that which you might want to ask at the end. And it's a lovely small group, so you can just put your camera on and ask a question later on if you want to, if you don't want to pop it in the chat. So that's diagnosis. I want to talk a little bit about intervention. So I mentioned co-op, which stands for Cognitive Orientation to Daily Occupational Performance. And that's an intervention that was developed in the late 80s, early 90s. It's been around for that long in Canada. It came to Australia probably in the early 2000s after there was 3 publications that outlined the intervention. So Helen Politako is one of the main authors of that intervention in Canada, and it's governed by an organisation called ICANN, and I'll share with you the link to that organisation because that's where you can find a co-op therapist. So mostly occupational therapists, but physiotherapists and exercise physiologists are able to do the training as well. And we have had some special educators or PE teachers join that training as well. So I'm a co-op instructor, so I've been qualified as a co-op instructor since 2011 and have been delivering training to occupational therapists and others to be able to implement co-op. They don't have to be trained, but it's obviously recommended that people are trained in co-op it's actually quite a complex intervention to deliver well, and so the training really supports therapists to be able to upskill in that. It also, for some therapists, is quite a different approach to how they may have been working. So if we've got parents here, some of you may have had therapy that's been quite impairment focused, might have been focused primarily around fine motor training, for example, rather than the activities that they need to be doing to be successful. So P, you gave a lovely example of the monkey bars. So I've had many children that I've worked with who wanted to do monkey bars, that was their goal, to be successful as that. And for most of those children, within 3-4 sessions, they've mastered monkey bars through using the co-op approach, because co-op enables children to do the problem solving with support. So it's something called guided discovery. So the therapist guides them to discover where things might not be working so well, where the activity might be breaking down, and then we problem solve strategies, different ways of doing something that works for their body. So we've given up on trying to make people normal or trying to make them like everybody else. We know that's not how brains work, that's not how bodies work, that's not how development works. And so what we're really working with is how people function, how they move, and we're helping them to do that planning and organising and coming up with those strategies. And it's incredibly effective. It can work. They can start to be successful with something in only a matter of a few sessions. And then we're also training them in that problem solving ability as well with something called goal plan do check. So it also enables that to carry on to their own learning. So it's not like they have to stay in intervention for years and years. It's a 10-week block, and then they can develop those problem-solving skills to be able to carry on to other activities. So that's a little bit about co-op. It's obviously a lot more to it than that, and thanks, Mel, has put the contact there for co-op for the ICANN website, and you can go and find a co-op certified therapist. That means that they've done the co-op training and they've been certified. But if you're looking for a therapist to work with your child with DCD, then just ask them if you have someone that's co-op trained, because without that training, they might just be not quite on the right track for what you need. In terms of school performance, really essential, I think, that OTs are working in the school with the child. I prefer to work with children in the classroom so that they're in that environment that they have to function in. There might be distractions. That's part of the strategy generation, is how you might manage those distractions. And so, you know, looking for somebody who can really provide that kind of service is really helpful. Now, I'll just talk a little bit about handwriting, because this often comes up, and in co-op we work with 3 goals that the child selects, and that's quite an important element to co-op, is that they're child chosen goals. Now, quite often a child, they usually will recognise and identify that handwriting is a problem, so they'll have it on their list of things I'm not very good at and things I'd like to get better at, but not always the top of their priority in terms of therapy. And so sometimes we kind of negotiate in, so it might be monkey bars and shoelaces, and we might have handwriting as well as the 3rd goal. And some children do pick handwriting as a goal, as a priority, but for a lot of them, some of those other, you know, more fun things, like playing soccer, kicking a ball, playing football, doing buttons, using cutlery, getting dressed, etc., might be other activities that they're really keen to develop. And so handwriting, we use this co-op approach for handwriting. One of the things that I think to be a little bit aware of is historically there's been quite an emphasis on things like how you hold your pencil rather than how you're moving the pencil. Now, there actually has been a lot of research that's been done on pencil grip and the quality of writing, and they actually don't have much of a relationship. You can have quite a terrible pencil grip and be a fantastic writer. So that's not usually the issue. And it can look terrible, you can look awkward. What we're really interested in is how they're managing those movements, planning the movements, getting a motor program to be able to remember the shape of the letter, where to start, where to finish, joining the letters. A lot going on in handwriting. It's a very complex cognitive and motor activity. So we need to be able to support the child to be able to do that planning and using cognitive strategies to support their learning in handwriting. Ideally, if I had my way, I would have a structured handwriting program that every child in the classroom was doing in their first sort of 2 to 3 years of school, and just 10 minutes a day, every day. But in most classrooms, that's not what's happening anymore. So quite a high number of children might be presenting with some challenges around handwriting, and so it's coming up with that training. So it's a task-oriented practice. They need to practice handwriting. So it's no good doing rainbow writing on the board or using your finger and shaving cream. You need to be doing writing with the implement that you're going to be writing with. And that's the fast track to getting better at writing, and then getting some support around how you might do that planning. So there are a few misconceptions, I think, still around the best way to support writing, but using those cognitive motor strategies is shown through the research that that's the most effective. So I think I will leave mine there so that we've got plenty of time for questions, and I'll hand over to Alyshia now.
Hello, my name's Alyshia and I'm a high school teacher. I'm actually a learning enrichment teacher and assistant curriculum coordinator, so I get to make a lot of choices within the school on how we can support our students. I also am an adult with DCD, and so that gives me a really unique perspective on how to best support our students. I've got a very quick little presentation that I'm going to share with you that answered a lot of the questions to do with the transition to high school and supporting students in all those different high school subjects, such as science or cooking, things that you didn't have to worry about too much in primary school. So I'll just bring that up now. Alrighty, are you able to see my screen? No?
No, we can't see it, Alyshia.
Oh, that's annoying. I will talk you through it. Okay, so yes, I'm a secondary teacher. I have DCD. The way that I got into DCD Australia Inc. was through my advocacy work on Instagram, where I'm trying to share a lot of information on DCD, ADHD, and ASD. My name there is not just clumsy. So let's just get straight into reasonable adjustments. So Australian law actually requires schools to make reasonable adjustments for students with disability. And the legislation involved in that is like the Disability Discrimination Act and the Disability Standards for Education from 2005. Reasonable adjustments apply to everything that you do at school. So that's not just an English lesson, it's also things like school excursions, camps, how you interact with each other in the playground, that's all learning. So Australian students with a disability must be able to access and participate in education on the same basis as their peers. And so they must be able to receive adjustments based on the professional judgment of teachers, and that's done in consultation with the parents, caregivers, and their parents or guardians. So I'm just going to go, oh, thank you very much.
Can you see those slides? They're working.
That's perfect, thank you. If we go to the next slide, these are the 6 things that I really focus on. They are extra time, alternative formats, assistive technology, pre-teaching steps, reducing the load, and reducing the mental load. So a really easy adjustment for every subject is providing extra time to complete the task. Super easy. Every teacher can do that with minimal impact on their class. They can also provide alternative formats. So that means instead of providing a written essay on Romeo and Juliet, they can film a video going through the same content, going through the same analysis, and the student's not having to write everything down. There's also assistive technology, so speech to text, using dictation software, using an iPad to type their notes instead of handwriting. That's really, really useful. With the pre-teaching steps to new practical tasks, this should be done for all students, really. All students would benefit from this. So if you're teaching a class on how to do a practical science experiment or how to cook something, teaching the steps before you throw them in and doing it will help them beforehand. This one's really important too, reducing the load but still having high expectations. So we still want students to do what they need to do. We still want them to meet the outcomes they need to meet. To do that, maybe instead of giving them the 8 maths questions, they do 4 maths questions, but you select 4 maths questions of varied difficulty so that students can still show that they can do the most difficult maths question at the end there. You still have to have high expectations. And the last one there is reducing the mental load. So this is where we chunk tasks into smaller, more manageable tasks. Because when you are fatigued, when you are uncomfortable in your chair, when you are already struggling with organizing your body and the work in front of you, the last thing that you need are 50 instructions all coming at you at once. Just one little bit at a time, one tiny little task at a time. Alrighty, let's go next. So with regards to the physical environment, we should always make sure that we've got a clutter-free and organized classroom to minimize distractions and obstacles. And our students have a designated organized workspace with ergonomic furniture and tools. So This would benefit all students, to be perfectly honest. I work really closely with a lot of the psychologists that my students see, and they are always mortified by some of the schools they go into that are absolutely covered in visual clutter, that have got furniture everywhere. As an adult with DCD, I'm always bruising myself on furniture when rooms are too cluttered. So make it easier for kids. Have what you need there. Make it ergonomic, make it work for the whole class. If we go next, these are my top tips for transitioning to high school, and there were a lot of questions about this particular topic. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to prepare your child really, really early on for the transition into high school. So you need to talk about the expected changes way before and gradually introduce them to the concept of high school. It's really, really important that you also meet with the school staff, and if possible, have an IEP or a PLP, whatever your school system calls them, before enrolment or early on in the school year as possible. You also need to learn the school environment. I cannot stress this enough. This is so important for students, not just with DCD, but for ASD and ADHD as well. The way that this would work best would be to get a map of the school, color code the map of the school, get the timetable, color code the timetable. So English is red. My classroom on the map is red. Have all of your students' English books color-coded, like English is red, maths is blue. All of their resources that they need are the appropriate color for the subject. So everything is consistent and lines up. And then have a peer guide or a teacher help guide the student around the school multiple times, preferably while the student is still in year 6. At my school, my students are really, really lucky. We try to remove as many barriers as possible, and our students stay in the same classroom all day, and the teachers come around to them because we have a very diverse range of students, and we just wanted to remove as many barriers as possible. But your student might not be so lucky. They might be in a school with 1,200 other kids and be scattered all over the place throughout the day. So removing the stress of not knowing where to go might really, really help. With the organisational skills, you really need to teach kids this. Kids do not innately know this. And we know a lot of kids with DCD really struggle with their executive function, and so they need help organising themselves. They need to be more independent. They need to keep on track of their equipment and their materials. So again, color coding books to line up with the timetable, that helps immensely. Also, having a visual organizer of what's required would really help too. So for example, if your student has maths and science and then English on a Monday, having that really clearly in front of them at home where they keep their bag, and so everything all lines up there, might be really, really helpful. Again, time management is another one. A lot of, again, my school doesn't have homework, and we don't have take-home assessment tasks because we want to get rid of that barrier. But for students who do have those deadlines that they need to worry about or things that they need to take home, digital calendars are really helpful, or even a school diary where teachers can print out homework tasks and glue them into them so the student doesn't have to worry about writing them in. That would be a really simple, easy thing that the teacher could do to help out there. And the last one which is incredibly hard with teenagers because they might be really, really self-conscious and uncomfortable, but it's teaching self-advocacy. So it's really, really essential that your child understands their condition and how they can advocate for themselves. This might not happen in year 7, this might not happen in year 8, but by the time the student is in year 12 and they're confident with what they need to succeed and happy to ask for it, like, this will help so, so much. A lot of our kids, like my kids, know that they can ask for it if we've forgotten something, and we're never going to question it or push them back on it. It's really something that we encourage culturally at our school. Alrighty, let's move on. Thank you so much, Jackie. Alrighty, so a reason why I end up with a lot of students coming to our school from larger mainstream schools is because of the different subjects and the different rooms, and those students haven't been properly supported at those schools. So students with DCD might benefit from extra time to get from class to class. They might benefit from extra time to get changed from for PDHPE or get themselves ready for recess and lunch. And again, the colour-coded school map, timetable and resources, all matching, all consistent, free up some room in the brain. All right, so I've covered some adjustments for a range of subjects that are usually forgotten about. Usually a lot of the accommodations or adjustments that are really well known are for subjects like English, where you like extra time, assistive technology, sentence starters if needed, and then for maths, grid paper, help with rulers, that kind of thing. So I focused on the subjects that come up in high school that create a bit of problem. Sorry, a bit of difficulty for people. Sorry, I have DCD and I'm fading fast. It's really obvious. After the sun goes down, I go down too. All right. So
Alyshia, do you want a break, and like we can put these online, because I know you've got a few slides with different things.
And then we can
so
go to some questions.
Yeah, and give you
well,
give
you
you
can
a chance
share
to
all
take
this
a
with
break.
everybody. There's food tech, there's science, there's a whole heap of things that will help out.
Thank you. And you're right, Pia. I think Alyshia's school does sound amazing. I've heard about it before, and it does sound like it's a brilliant place, and I wish it was replicated all over the place. And Elspeth, as somebody who does not hold their pen correctly, even though I don't have DCD, the number of times my mother was dragged into school when I was a child and got told off because I didn't hold my pen right.
I know. Let it go. There's a
All
couple
right.
of questions here I can respond to, Jackie, if you're happy
that would
for
be
me
great.
to pick that up.
Yep.
Yeah, so thanks, Diane. There's some great ones here. One, I'll start with the one about what is the relationship of DCD and emotional regulation and performance anxiety? And this is a really interesting one. There's been quite a lot of research done about this, and even in relation to co-op and self-esteem, has shown that self-esteem has improved with, or self-efficacy really, not self-esteem, self-efficacy with co-op. And I think it's really important to interpret the behaviour. So kids with DCD will quite often show avoidance behaviours, and that might get interpreted as being naughty or, impulsive, or, so really looking for what might be behind that behaviour. There's a huge cognitive load in being able to manage how you move when you've got DCD. And so that leads to fatigue, that leads to, cognitive load, not being able to do lots of things at the one time. So again, it's really helpful for teachers to understand that that's what's going on, and be able to just, let's just do one thing at a time, not overloading them. If you see that they're avoiding, maybe it's because the task is too hard, so then just reducing the demands of the task. So really important to just figure out what is going on in terms of the behaviour. with co-op, we found that even that behaviour becomes more regulated because they're actually able to do things. They're successful, they're feeling successful, they're working hard at doing the problem solving, but they're getting good outcomes from their perspective. So all of those things really feed into improving that. There was a question here too about sports. We had a lovely conversation, Alyshia and Pia and I, about this earlier. And so those team sports can be really challenging. Again, if you think about that cognitive load of I've got to figure out, you know, my whole body how to kick the ball in the right direction, and then I've got to think about who to kick it to and, you know, who next and what the rules are, and like there's a lot going on. So, you know, being able to support children to be able to get better at those skills, so being able to kick the ball better and being able to manage that, enables them to be able to start to manage some of those other more complex elements of team sports. But of course, not everybody has to do team sports, and so there are lots of other alternatives of play and physical activity that kids can do that don't have those same demands. But I find I've worked with a lot of 8 to 10-year-old boys, and they want to do soccer and they want to do football and they want to do down ball, and so, you know, we make that happen as best we can. I've worked a lot with coaches, and so sometimes it's about the coaches having a good understanding that they need more time, they need to practice the skills for longer, and they'll need more scaffolding in terms of, you know, the rules and, you know, the sort of team play and things. So, you know, that can be helpful if you can, you know, get to a coach to sort of think about things in a slightly different way. I did forget to mention about there's the sort of technology versus handwriting. And so coming into school, you know, if your child does have difficulties with handwriting, it's important to think about it as handwriting training. So having time to learn how to write and using that time and using the strategies that we know are successful for learning to write. And then the functional written communication. And that really varies between children. So for some children, they might need something in prep. Other children, they might not need, you know, to type, for example, until grade 3. Certainly by grade 3, I would recommend that they're learning to touch type, and touch typing will give them an advantage as they go through, as they move through school, and particularly in high school. But if you have coordination difficulties, learning to type is hard, just like writing is hard. You eliminate the legibility element, so they're going to have lovely readable writing, but it's going to still be slow. And so, you know, that training of typing is still an important element. It's not just an immediate replacement. That there are, you know, iPads and all sorts of other forms of communication. I do think it's important to still train writing in those early years. It needs to be functional. You've got to fill out forms still. You still have to sign your name, you know, write birthday cards, those sorts of things. So really enabling them to at least be able to do that, and then moving on to other technology for that really, you know, having to write a lot of things. They can record, they can speak into a recorder to get their message through, you know, lots of different ways that they can do that.
Thanks, Elspeth. We might ask you if you, well, I might actually ask you if we've heard some strategies from Pia about how she manages fatigue with her daughter, but there is another question about fatigue, and just from an OT perspective, is there strategies that you would recommend?
I think Pia's actually were great. You know, they're really helpful strategies around fatigue. Again, it's balancing. Fatigue is not only a physical thing, but it comes from that cognitive load as well. And so again, it's tuning into that and knowing when to give a child a break, and actually helping the child to be able to say when they need a break. So I'm really want children to be empowered right from the word go, so that it's not, and we were talking about the communication between the team. The child needs to be at the centre of that team and to have a voice in what they need to do, and to be able to say to people when this is too much, I need a break, can I go and play with the Lego? You know, that will take time, and some children might never be able to do that because they're shy, or, you know, might have other difficulties. But as best we can, to help them to identify strategies that are going to work for them. So we can make some good suggestions about things that would work for children generally, but there are always individual things that are going to be tailored, and we need to find that out from the child of what's useful for them and the words that they want to use to describe it. That's just sort of making them more at the centre.
You mentioned Lego. Diane's just asked what other good timeouts there are other than just watching cartoons. Alicia's added that she used to like to play with Play-Doh and Lego.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think
those.
sometimes I've found it's just like a movement break and encouraging that change in position in the classroom. So my daughter uses, you know, like between the mat where she's got a supportive chair, then she also uses standing sort of desk or, you know, sitting in a seat. So it's, I think, alternating for her through a variety of postures and sort of assisted seats is really helpful, but also being able to sort of, you know, go for a walk outside of the classroom just to kind of get a little bit of a sensory break, but also to kind of move her legs, because otherwise she not only fatigues, but she gets pain underneath her knees if she's sitting for a long period of time. So I think some of the breaks don't just look like, you know, kind of just vegging out. Some of them are actually, you know, movement breaks or brain breaks like that. And in terms of fatigue, like we've worked with our OT around, you know, regular breaks and how we actually do that. My daughter's a real people pleaser, so she would rather push through her pain thresholds to finish a task so that she doesn't, you know, stand out. And so that is really hard in terms of teaching that advocacy, and particularly for like, you know, a 5 or a 6-year-old who might not have the language or, you know, the maturity to be able to advocate for themselves. We ended up creating some communication cards, which she wore just on a little zippy thing on her skirt, where she could say basically or point to, like, you know, if something hurt. She had pictures of sore elbow, sore hand kind of stuff, so she could show the teacher if she wasn't feeling comfortable using her voice what was hurting, and then she had some options on some of the cards around what she could do, whether she needed to go for a walk, get a drink, needed a band-aid, ice pack, that kind of stuff, so that she could kind of start to problem solve for herself around some of that fatigue.
And even things like this colouring in, you know, it doesn't need to be, you know, really neat or, you know, drawing. I remember my son's school used to have a table set up that had a still life, and she had crayons and pencils, and any child at any time could go and have a break by doing some drawing and doing this still life. And she had a beautiful, calm classroom, you know, that children felt comfortable to go and have that break. And so, you know, Alyshia, I loved it's so important, that kind of neat classroom and organised, and just so that there's not this kind of overwhelm. I think getting into nature as well. So even, you know, going for a little walk and, you know, picking up leaves or, you know, those sorts of things, I think can be quite fun as well.
Our daughter will often be the handy helper, which is like a real privilege, but it's the strategy of the teachers to actually get her to be able to move around the classroom and break up kind of her sitting, which is really lovely to also kind of do. Yeah.
That's all the questions we have in the chat, but does anyone have any other questions? You're welcome to ask them directly, or you can pop them in the chat. What I will pop in the chat in case anybody
the other question that we didn't cover off completely was preparing for starting full-time school. You talked about that graded kind of attendance, Pia, but from a skills perspective, it's really in that holiday break before school, practicing the skills, practicing packing your bag, opening your lunchbox, doing zippers, putting your uniform on, doing your shoes, all of that routine. If you can go and play in the playground of the school during the holidays, some schools let you do that, some don't, so that they're familiar with the environment. That just lowers that anxiety and that stress level if they're familiar with that environment well in advance.
Yeah, I think that's great suggestions. And we use the January holidays and the December holidays to do like an intensive block of physio, where our daughter was working with her physio around some of those playground play kind of skills that she was going to need to know around, you know, being able to, you know, jump for hopscotch. She's was working on skipping this afternoon. I think we've got to 2 skips now. You know, those kind of things, monkey bars. And we did a school readiness program as well with our OT, which she graduated from, and that was really helpful. The other things I would suggest is also with the site visit to the school, just checking things around taps, toilets and water bubblers as well, making sure those little hands can actually use them, because some of the water bubblers and water fountains are really tricky to turn, particularly if they're the older types. Some flushes we find when we're out and about are really hard for her, particularly also with the real bendy hypermobility hands, to actually be able to operate independently. And toileting can be a bit of a challenge for those who are starting at kind of like prep as well, for any kid, but particularly if you've got to coordinate balancing on a toilet as well as wiping your bottom. And a lot of kids, I find, will hold on until they kind of get home to poop, but it can set up a bit of a nasty pattern of constipation and then tummy pain and then school avoidance. So it's just one to stay on top of and be able to talk to the teachers. And I found going and having a meeting with the teachers the day before they sort of started, so that it was quiet in the classroom and I could speak to them and introduce Grace, use that handover sheet, and she got to meet them as well, see what the classroom looked like before it was overwhelming with all the other kids in there, and that really helped.
Thanks, Pia. I am mindful of time. We've got a couple more questions in there if we can squeeze them in. Amy's asked, what else should the school be providing support-wise for a grade 4? We have an IEP. That's about it. We brought a laptop for speech to text. The questions that don't get answered, sorry, I will just quickly say we will, if there's any other questions that are there, we will type up some answers and put them online so that we still get to your answers. So over to you, Alyshia.
Yeah, so Amy, I think it is essential for the IEP that you've got a really, really clear understanding of what your student needs to succeed in the classroom and what their difficulties are in the classroom. For instance, I had a boy with DCD, and in PDHPE class, you would not know. He was an athlete. He was an incredible boxer. In the classroom, he could not hold a pencil. He was 16, he couldn't type, and he had some pretty significant fine motor problems. So knowing precisely what your students' challenges are and how to tackle them would be really, really essential first. Having the laptop's really, really helpful for the speech to text, but I'm sure there's other stuff going on that your student needs support with. I'm more than happy to share resources if you need them, and I'll give them to Jackie. I'm not sure how helpful that was, Amy.
That's all right. I think given we've hit 8 o'clock, I'm just mindful of people's evenings, so we might end that here. I would just like to firstly thank everyone for coming along tonight. It's really a really nice opportunity for us to try and answer some of the common questions that we get, and to just connect with people across the country. I'd like to thank Alyshia and Elspeth and Pia for your time this evening. It's very much appreciated. I'd also like to thank Melissa Lakari, who's another one of our committee members, who's been typing away in the chat, sending links and things like that. So it's very much appreciated too, Mel. We'll pop the recording up, so you'll be able to share it with anybody else that you think would find it helpful. Mel's just put up a contact link for us, and I will just give a little shout out to Mel's worked pretty hard over the last few weeks, and she's created a beautiful video called Dear Teacher. It did go up on Facebook the other day, but we know a lot of people didn't come up on a lot of feeds. We're about to put it up again, so go over and have a look, and feel free to share widely that video, because it's a nice little video that just sort of explains to teachers in children's own words what a lot of the challenges are they have, and a little bit of support for teachers in terms of ways that they can help improve the lives of kids with DCD. So it's about to go on to, or probably just has gone onto Facebook again, so pop over onto the DCD Australia Facebook page and have a look and share away. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Good night.
Thanks for coming and good luck. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
There you go. I'll stop recording before we start talking.